Hello, and welcome back to Under 1000. I'm your host, Thomas Flower. Each episode, I'll read you a piece of super short fiction. All of them are 1,000 words or less. This episode, I'll be reading you a piece called The Entertainers. Please be aware that this story deals with issues of death, forced migration, and PTSD. If those are likely to be upsetting to you or anyone that you're listening with, then you might want to skip this episode. Koji sighed as he swiped in. Work again. He was just old enough to remember a time when people could still get jobs which didn't involve these strange daily humiliations. Shop owners, baristas, accountants, farmers. Of course, all of that had gone long ago, automated out of existence with algorithms, robots and machines. But everybody still needed to make their money, and so here they all were, clocking in for another shift. The trouble was that it had to be so real. You'd have to be a perfect actor to make it up, and certainly no one around here had been trained up for that. No, the only way was for it to be a genuine experience, or for you to be so in need that you'd convince yourself a story was real just to give a good performance. Reality was what the clients were paying for, and if they didn't feel they got it, there would be no fee at all. Morosely, Koji entered his individual work booth, tapping his card on the electronic desk in front of him. Logging in. Koji Williams, a computer voice stated calmly. Of course, they were only paid for time spent with the clients. The rest of the time they had to wait, sitting in these cramped and tiny booths until the next paying customer showed up. It wouldn't be so bad, actually, he thought, if they were allowed to do something in there, read, talk with each other, watch some holovids. But of course that was strictly prohibited. Nothing was allowed to distract them. They had to be ready to entertain at a moment's notice. Lateness causes unhappy customers, as they'd been told at the induction day. Koji was snapped back to reality by a steady bleeping sound coming from the desk. Evidently there must be a customer waiting on the other side of the screen. The details flashed up before him. A middle-aged man worked in the top end of the new Federation banking system. Certainly someone with money to spend, and who might tip well, Koji thought. He pressed the ready button and waited for the call to begin. Initializing call. Call started. Please proceed, the digital voice intoned. The client could see him now, but of course he couldn't see the client. Koji was used to this, but it still made him feel uncomfortable somehow. He wondered if that anonymity was part of the thrill for some of them. Please begin. I'm looking for a really compelling story today, the man's voice came down the line. Koji settled himself momentarily, and then began recounting. Well, I was born in the new East Asian conglomerate, though the countries were still separate back then, so really I was born in Japan, right before it became part of the bloc. Anyway, I'm sure you remember the nuclear strike in 2035, the start of the Great Pacific War? He paused for a second, but hearing no response, pushed on. Well, anyway, we were one of the families lucky enough to survive, but we had nowhere left to live and barely any possessions left. My family were determined to flee and come here. I must have been about 10 at the time. We got on the first boat we could, heading out the country. It was barely serviceable, and we were crammed in with so many others, but we just felt lucky to be amongst those leaving the country. So many people weren't able to. He could feel the emotions stirring in him again. No matter how many times he told this story, they always came back. Still, Koji thought to himself, the day that ceases to be true is the day I'm out of a job. The problem was that so many people were getting sick on board, he continued. The effects of radiation exposure, plus there was so little food to go around that after a few days we were practically starving. The captain died only a few days in, and there was nobody properly trained to replace him. We did our best, but... He could feel the tears springing to his eyes now. He knew the client would be able to see this as well. He wondered what the man must be thinking when he saw such displays of raw emotion before him. Well, it didn't work out. None of us knew what we were doing or what was going on, me especially at such a young age. One day the boat just keeled over into the water. 1,000 people stranded at sea, gasping for life. I didn't know where my parents were. I wasn't with them when we capsized. I was trying desperately to spot them, but all I could see were indistinct figures screaming and crying and drowning. Tears were flooding down his face now, a mess of his remembered feelings displayed for the other to see. Anyway, I found a bit of wood, something ripped up from the deck of the ship. I clung to it for dear life. I don't know how long I was out there, freezing away in the sea, but they must have sent a rescue team out because eventually I was picked up, and that's how I ended up here. He was a mess now, barely able to speak anymore. Never got any easier, reliving your greatest traumas for someone else to peruse. Not a bad story, I suppose, came the voice from the other line. Weak ending, though, and refugee details are a bit common these days. Moving, but it could do with a more compelling element. I'm only tipping 5% for this one. With that, the line went dead. Koji looked at the desk. His balance had gone up. First money of the day. He wiped the tears from his eyes, sat back in his chair, and tried to compose himself for the next customer. Thank you for listening to Under 1000. I'm your host, Thomas Flair. The theme music is an instrumental version of In Between Days by Nick Tate and the Sharks. To hear the full song and more from the same EP, go to Nick Tate, Nictate, and the Sharks.bandcamp.com, or search for them on your preferred streaming platform. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you'll join us again next time for some more super short fiction.